Good evening. It is 7:30, and so I will call to order the September 21st, 2021 meeting of the City of Troy Zoning Board of Appeals. Welcome to everyone. Full complement of members tonight, and our city staff, welcome, and to our guest visitors and petitioners, glad to see you here. We'll just get started with our first item on the agenda tonight, which is the roll call. And Mr. Evans, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Desmond.
Here.
Mr. Eisenbacher.
Here.
Mr. McCauley.
Here.
Mr. Bossenbrook.
Here.
Mr. Rahman.
Here.
Mr. Kenkry.
Here.
Mr. Green.
Here.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Evans. On to item number 2. We're going to ask, I'm going to ask our Vice Chair, Mr. Eisenbacher, if he could read our procedure for how we operate here tonight.
I'm not seeing it in our agenda.
Did I not put it in there? I'm not seeing
there.
it either. One sec. I'll get it up on the screen.
I don't see it in
We
the
opened
agenda.
last month's.
Thank you.
Stand by.
This laptop's got the little.
Looks like it's on the screen. I don't know if you're able to read that,
Yeah.
Mr. Eisenbacher.
Okay. The Zoning Board of Appeals is a group of 7 of your neighbors appointed by Troy City Council to decide on requests for variances and other matters that are brought before them. A variance is a relaxation of the literal provisions of the zoning ordinance. Petitioners must indicate a hardship or practical difficulty with the land that would warrant the granting of the variance. Procedure. The board will hear the items in the order that they appear on the agenda. When an item is called, the chairman will verify that the petitioner is present. Then the city administration will summarize the facts of the case. The petitioner will then be given an opportunity to address the board to explain the justification for the action requested. After the petitioner makes their presentation and answers any questions that the board may have, the chairman will open the public hearing. At the conclusion of public comments, the chairman will close the public hearing. Once the public hearing is closed, no other public comments will be taken unless in response to a specific question by a member of the board. The board will then make a motion to approve, deny, or postpone the request. In order for the request to pass, a minimum of 4 votes are needed. If the request is not granted, the applicant has the right to appeal the board's decision to Oakland County Circuit Court.
Thank you, Mr. Eisenbacher, and thank you, Mr. Evans, for pulling that up. All right, the procedure has been read, so let's move on to our third item. And printed in our agenda packet is the meeting minutes from last month's meeting in August. And unless there are any comment questions, could I get a motion to approve? Or Mr. Green?
I move to amend to note that I was absent at that meeting as well.
Is there a second on that?
Second.
Okay.
I think you are listed as absent.
Is it?
Yeah.
Where? I'm a,
First page, it says roll call present, and it calls you as you and Mr. Desmond absent.
I'm misreading.
The copy that I have in front of me just lists Mr.
Oh.
Desmond as absent.
Desmond noted.
You've got a more current one, good.
Well, okay.
You don't even have Mr. Green listed.
What's in the envelope?
Good enough.
In the folder.
The good news is that the current copy has that, so
I withdraw the motion.
thank you.
I second that.
Okay. My paper copy has Mr. Green listed as absent.
right.
So the
Good.
motion's withdrawn? Okay. All right, with that in mind, do I have a motion then to approve? Mr. Green?
Move to approve the minutes
Okay.
as physically printed somewhere.
All right, as printed in the purple folder. All right. Second, Mr. McCauley. All right, I think we're ready for a vote.
Mr. Eisenbacher,
Yes.
Mr. McCauley,
Yes.
Mr. Green,
Yes.
Mr. Rahman,
Yes.
Mr. Kenkre,
Yes.
Mr. Bossenbrook,
Yes.
Mr. Desmond.
Yes.
Okay, minutes approved. Now we move on to our fourth item, which is tonight's agenda. Looking to approve that unless there's any comments? No? Okay, we will move on to approve tonight's agenda as printed. And with that, we will move into item number 5, which is the hearing of our single case tonight. Variance request at 5282 Ludstone. And I will begin by asking Mr. Evans if he could present to the board on this appeal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, this is for property on Ludstone. As printed in the agenda, this is a variance request to construct a deck setback 18 feet from the rear property line, where the zoning ordinance requires the deck to be set back at least 25 feet from the rear property line. On my presentation at the screens, this is an overview of the neighborhood. Subject property on Ludstone is circled in red. Now, this neighborhood's north of Long Lake between Rochester and John R. And I'll continue to zoom in on the neighborhood with the property outlined in red. Our zoning map shows that all the subject property you see in this is either zoned single-family residential or environmental protection / community facilities, which are parks. As you can tell from the aerials, it's a rather new neighborhood. Now, this is the site plan they've provided, and you've got a copy in your packet. Now, Ludstone is at the top of this drawing, but at the bottom, they show the house and then the proposed deck, and there's a note here that says the proposed setback would be between 22 and 18 feet. So they're offering what I call a flexible plan, and perhaps they can enumerate on that in their presentation if desired by the board. But since the closest they wanted to go was 18 feet, that's how we advertised it. And they're looking for an 18-foot setback from the rear property line. Now, this development, similar to others that have come before the board, is a single-family cluster development. And in brief summary, what that means is, as requested by the developer, the city has a mechanism where they can actually have increased density. The lots can be closer together, the houses can be closer together, but as a trade-off, they have a common space that surrounds the development that it's common area, so it belongs to the association. And many times there's provisions in the approval documents that protect that common space from being developed in any way, shape, or form. It can't be cut, it can't be mowed, you can't put bushes on it. So in this instance, the subject property is outlined in red, and I'm going to zoom in just to give the board an idea of the particular preservation common element that is adjacent to this property. It's right in this area here. And so behind the existing property, the subject property, the preservation common area is about 50 feet deep. And this is just a typical setback configuration for the neighborhood. This is lot 14, but they're all the same, which just shows that the typical rear setback for this neighborhood is 25 feet. You've got some additional documents that they've provided in the application in your packet. And I'll turn it back over to the board for any questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Evans. Any questions for city staff? Seeing none? Okay. At this point, thank you for that presentation. I would ask the petitioner if they would like to come forward, either the petitioner or the representative, like to come forward to the podium up here, and if you could identify yourself and your relationship to the property and try to speak into the microphone so we can pick it up.
Hello, my name is Eugene Malerenko, and I'm the owner of this property at 5282 Ludstone. Do you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. Thank you.
Have you had a chance to read our answers to the statement of practical difficulty? We prepared some like a 1.5 page answers. Did you have a chance to read them?
We have, yeah, we
Oh.
have the material, the written materials that you presented to Mr. Evans, and so
excellent.
feel free to summarize or anything you want to add to that, to your presentation.
If you're familiar, then I will just briefly summarize, so because it's like lengthy. So the main thing that it's basically a single, the only ranch in this neighborhood, and so we wanted to keep 3 bedrooms on the first floor for some reasons, and that's why it has a much larger footprint. So that's why the actually backyard is smaller than in the other houses. So, and also we didn't know that there is such ordinance that we're not allowed to build a deck or something. And when the time came, we contacted our contractor, cedar fences, custom cedar fences, Mr. John Roberts, and he actually is knowledgeable in technical details, so he can answer other questions if I fail to answer some technical questions. So, and Mr. Roberts applied for a permit and got rejected because of this ordinance that there is offset. We need to maintain 25-foot setback from any structure in the backyard from the property line. So now what we are asking for? We are asking for a variance granting us like from 3 to 7 foot wider deck. So instead of 7-foot deck, 7-foot wide deck, which is allowed by this ordinance, we would have a 14-foot deck maximum, if you allow this. And so what are the arguments that we can say like in favor of our proposal? First of all, I mean, behind the property line is bordered by is actually demarcated by the city drain. And I mean, there is a well, and the middle of that well is a property line. Behind that well, there is a 10-foot clear of vegetation strip of land, which builder cleared. And then there is about 30 or 35 feet of green space. So if we add all that together, and if we maintain even like 10-foot setback, then we will have 50 foot away from the property on the next door neighbor on the Ellison Drive. So basically, if this variance that we're asking for 18 to 22 feet is granted, then we will automatically fulfill the intent of this ordinance to actually maintain more than 50 feet between structures in adjacent properties. And we are not violating it. We will be more than 50 feet away from anything on the property of Ellison Drive because of this green space. And second thing, we actively maintaining and promising to maintain committing this green area because I mean, my wife, my mother-in-law, they're green thumbs and they will be planting trees. We already started like from day 1 in December, we even planted some spruce in that forest. And right now we will be planting rain trees because we have some like after rain and between rains when they're frequent, there is a sagging and swamping area between next to this city drain. So if we build a patio, then all this water from the concrete will be dumped into that swampy area. But deck, on the other hand, is much better because it's like wood. I mean, there are gaps between planks. Water will go through and get soaked by the land. So there will be no extra threat for this area to be swamped. Another thing is, why don't we want to build patio? Because patio is we have a grade like 1 foot per 10 feet of slope, basically, a grading, steep grading, and in the backyard. And if we build a patio, it will have several steps, will be kind of trip hazard. We originally didn't like to have a patio. We just committed to build a deck. I mean, and deck is much safer, is the one level with the kitchen. And it's not a tall structure. It's only 22 feet from the ground at the onset. And then it will be like maybe 35 foot at the very last, at the edge, yeah? Also, it doesn't create any obstruction to the neighbors. I mean, they have swimming pools, they have bigger patios, so this deck is absolutely not going to be any shading or any obstruction to the wind or something, to the airflow. So I guess all these arguments are in favor of the deck. than patio or something else, for which there is no restriction. So that's basically what what we are asking. We are asking to allow us to build a wider deck, not 7 feet, but from 10 to 14 maximum. 14 is highly desired.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Sir, you can just stand. We may have some questions from any board members. Have any questions for our petitioner, Mr. McCauley?
Question for you. If you step out your back door and to step down to ground level, how far down is that?
About, I remember 20-something inches, yeah?
22 inches.
22 inches.
22 inches. Okay. Okay, thank you.
You have to jump, and then there is a slope.
Okay.
Can you step forward a little bit, sir? Mr. Eisenbacher?
Just by chance, I was just looking at page 20 in our packet, and it shows the cross-section of the deck. Shows the 22 inches right at the house, and then with the slope, it's 32 inches if the variance is granted at the back of the deck. And then it's 60 inches, 5 feet, at 32 feet from the house. So it's a decent slope.
I have a question, sir. Are you looking at the overhead pictures? It looks like, at least the ones that were submitted, the house is still being built. Is your house built now, or are you?
We moved in December. We lived like a block away, and we moved in December. It was fully built in December.
Last December you moved in?
Last December, yeah.
Okay.
So it's already almost a year.
Okay. Mr. McCauley?
Now, you're the only ranch in the neighborhood, and is that ranch built by the same builder that built all the other houses?
Yes, they have 2 floor plans. I mean, actually several floor plans, but we wanted a range, and they had a range. But we asked to modify. We asked one more bedroom upstairs. So it's basically like a flat range with 1 room upstairs.
Okay,
That's what it is.
thank you.
Mr. Rahman?
Yeah, so the master bedroom is on the ground floor? Or
Yeah, ground floor. Everything is like there is only one kind of guest suite upstairs.
Okay,
Everything else is on the.
and again, this is just a one ranch-style house, the rest are in this subdivision are, okay.
Yeah, most of them are 4 or 5 bedroom, and they are like standard 2-story buildings with everything
Yeah,
upstairs.
no, I
And this one has more. It's a
So
range.
those houses, it's not a problem to build the deck.
But most of them build in patios, and our neighbor has in-ground swimming pool, which is like much closer. But most of them build patios, maybe because the builders are in the area, or maybe because people don't know. We just really, all the houses we lived in.
But the patio, you mentioned that it's kind of sloped, so it's difficult to.
All houses are different. Like in the middle, there is a different grading, and there are different conditions. In our particular case, for some reason, there is a steep slope.
Thank you so much. Sure.
Does that steep slope, so you're at 5282, do your neighbors have the same problem, or is it, I mean, where?
Yes, my neighbor.
To the east, I guess to the north and south?
Closer to the drive, basically. Lot number 1, they just built a patio. They have the same steep slope. They have like a young kid, no problem with that. And they had to build several steps, and you can see that, you know. And the other neighbors also have the same thing.
Okay.
And the neighbor to the southeast, I think, next door, he has this swimming pool, and also they have steps.
Okay. Mr. Desmond?
Just for my clarity, you mentioned that you want to extend it further than setbacks will currently allow because there's something under the ground there. Did I get that correct? That would be a problem to build on top of? You want to build beyond it? Did I understand that correctly?
No, currently, we are allowed, if we maintain 25 feet, then it's only 7 foot wide. So it will become like a balcony. And it is including the staircases. So it's very small, and you cannot even put a round table in it, you know. And basically, if you look the curb appeal will be different, everything will be different. So originally we didn't know of this ordinance and we just planned the 14-foot. Now we are asking for the range. So if we are allowed 10-foot deck, then it makes more sense than 7-foot deck. And 14 is a full size we want. So
Okay.
that's kind of our thinking.
Okay, thank you.
Any other members of the board?
Is there a city drain in one corner of the house?
Drain?
Yeah.
Yeah, there is a city drain in the, I think it's a northwest. Oh, I don't remember the,
By lot 1?
whatever, northeast or northwest? Yeah, there is a drain and.
That's the northeast corner.
Northeast, yeah, because, and that well is, is basically the middle of it is a property line. And behind it, there is 10 more feet of clear land, and then there is a green space.
Okay. I think we have no more questions at this point, sir. So you feel free to take your seat, and the board, in a moment, will have more discussion. At this point, I will open the public hearing to see if there's any public comment on this matter, and I see and hear none. I'm sorry, sir, did you want to come forward? If you'd like to come forward, feel free to come to the.
Yes, I'm John Roberts, owner of Custom Cedar Fences, who has bid the job to build a deck here. I'm a retired chief engineer, structural, worked for Chrysler Corporation, and formed the business after I retired. There are a couple points on here that I don't know have been emphasized. They're really pretty important to the owner. And that is the fact that with this ground slope the way it is, there is a problem at the very bottom that it's a very soggy condition there. And that condition can be exacerbated by, if they were to do what's legal and build a patio out further, what you're going to get is 100% runoff off the back of that patio, which is going to flood that area worse. And they're not seeking to come out that as far as a patio could, but if they did go out as far as the patio is allowed, it could exacerbate that flooding problem. The next door neighbor has built a swimming pool, which comes within 10 feet of the lot line, and that has undoubtedly been contributing now to the water situation getting worse, okay? The owner has indicated that they're going to be taking special steps and have some with the city to try and exacerbate this problem by planting some trees to help absorb some of the moisture and also put in some sod. But there's no doubt that if they took the route of going with a solid surface out there, it would make the situation worse, not better. A deck that only goes out 14 feet and also is slotted allows water to go down and a lot of that water to get absorbed before it ever reaches the back lot line. So from a standpoint of not creating flooding back there, it's a better solution than going with a solid concrete block. And it's really caused because of the grade. If there were not a grade problem, there probably would be no issue.
Thank you, sir. Any questions? Was it Mr. Anderson? Is that Mr. Anderson, is that your name?
Roberts.
Roberts, I'm sorry. Any questions for Mr. Roberts? Okay, well, thank you, sir. Appreciate you adding that additional information. Now I will close the public hearing. And at this point, I will bring it back to the board to discuss. Mr. Green?
I suppose just my thoughts. I'm not ready to put a motion forward, but from a general, from a practicality standpoint, I totally understand where the petitioner is coming from. The grade makes it difficult, and as far as environmental impact, assuming a future addition or build, the deck certainly seems more environmentally friendly and more sensible overall, given the slope. I do recognize the grade problem. That is a bit unique, but the assumption of patio or deck is a false one because there's nothing there right now. So the homeowner is not threatening anything, but essentially he's saying either, to some extent, it seems like he's saying either let me build a deck or I'm going to build this patio, which is going to make things worse. That's not a requirement. The deck is better than a hypothetical state that does not yet exist. So I'm mixed right now.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Green. Mr. Desmond?
A question for Mr. Evans. This being new construction, and this is just for my own curiosity, does a grading issue constitute a problem caused by the previous owner because the builder created the grade across the entire subdivision?
In my opinion, if the problem is unique to a piece of property and not across the entire subdivision, maybe that could be considered a practical difficulty. I'm not a grading expert, and many times the cities rely on the developer's engineer to just simply provide a plan that works. I guess in theory, if I'm not an engineer, but it would seem to me that if you have a less steep grade or more of a steep grade, if you meet the grading standard, you meet the grading standard. If you exceed it because it's a little too steep for runoff and so forth, but it still works, I don't see why the city wouldn't approve it.
Okay. And is that space, that green space between the properties, is that rainwater runoff behind the property that we're talking about?
Oh, the area.
Where that's going to?
Yeah, so what they're describing in their application, that is the way that things are supposed to slope
Okay.
towards the
All right, so it wouldn't have
preservation
been,
area.
yeah, even if the builder put it in, it needs to be that way for appropriate runoff, theoretically?
I would have to say that's an accurate statement because a builder's going to do, typically a builder will want to meet the minimum requirements, and if the minimum requirement is to have it grade a certain way, they're going to design it that way so they get city approval.
Okay, so it sounds like this is a roughly conforming law, like the conformity is difficult. It seems like it's a little bit of a problematic lot based on that grade. Am I reading that correctly?
Well, I think that's a question for the board to
Okay,
perhaps consider.
thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. McCauley.
I also have another question for Mr. Evans. Looking at if there's a potential pooling of water there because of drain issues, I mean, isn't that something that should be addressed by, if the builder's still in the area, or the city, to see what needs to alleviate that pooling of water?
Well,
To alleviate that swampy area? I mean, if it's not graded properly, or neighbors have put things in, you know, I mean, isn't that the first, I mean, am I thinking illogically here?
well, it can happen that after a city grants approval to a particular grading plan, or in this case, as-built, things could change. Maybe there's work on the property next door and they inadvertently adjust a grade accidentally. But ultimately, it's the city's goal to get water away from the homes, away from areas, and ideally into the drains. That's why the drains are required. You want water to slope there. I'm sure if you talk to our grading engineer, he would want all the water to go into the drain if at all possible. Standing water is not something we want on developed property.
Also, thank you, Mr. Evans. Also, I'm hearing that the neighbors are putting in patios with a similar grade and not an issue with that. So the potential for a patio versus a deck is within range and something that they wouldn't even have to be here for. They talk about the stepping down from the house into the patio versus the deck. Well, your steps are going to be one way or the other because you're going to have steps going from the patio to the yard or the deck to the yard. So it really depends where you want your steps and where you don't want your steps, from my perspective. And this being the only ranch in there and being built 10 feet back, I would hope that the builder would have brought this to the attention of the homeowner before they built it, letting him know this. Do I think that happened? Probably not, because they didn't look at it or whatever, because that could have adjusted the house and the lot forward to provide them with the same setback. To me, this sounds very similar to a lot of ones that we see that want decks that in their 25-foot setback. Patio can go there. It can be graded. The neighbors have proved it. Steps are going to be one place or the other. So from my perspective, I'm not seeing the need for a deck where a patio could be put in. And we got to correct that drain, so that way it drains completely, so he doesn't have a swampy area.
Thank you, Mr. McCauley.
One more question, I guess, Mr. Evans again. The distinction between deck and patio, is it just based on the structural components of the posts being supported independently of a flat? Like, if somebody had a patio and then they just put hardwood across the top of it, functionally it's the same thing as a deck, right? Or is it the structural components that we're talking about? Just
Well,
curious.
in the instance where, if it flies like a duck, it walks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, it's a duck. Is it a deck or a patio? I guess somebody could design something in between. I think we can all agree that a typical deck is a structure on posts, usually at the grade of the first floor. Maybe it's got some rails because of its height, usually made out of wood or composite lumber, as opposed to historically a patio is going to be at grade. Usually there's materials that are in the ground, such as concrete or pavers. Those are some examples, but designers are very creative, and if there's something in between that is ever presented to the city, sometimes we got to look at these things before we can opine if it's a deck or a patio, if it's something in between. But in general, I think most people can agree what a deck is, most people can agree what a patio is. And then I'm thinking about it, I could double check our zoning ordinance definitions just to see if for whatever reason we define deck or define patio. In the instance that we don't, we just fall back on common dictionary definitions.
Okay. I just say, because I have a neighbor who put in a concrete patio a couple years ago, and it's tall, very steep, so I mean, it's got to be at least 1.5 feet. So, if he were to cover the surface of that with wood, how far off from that is a deck? So it's almost a little bit arbitrary, like, I get the concept of like a large deck that's on, piers and goes, it's high off the grade. Whatever, I guess it's semantic, but just curious.
Sure.
Thank you.
Mr. Kinkry?
So it looks like the neighbors have a preference to building patios, and I know a lot of people these days prefer a patio, but then I have to wonder if the runoff from all those patio, and if that is bringing more water to this drain, and this particular lot already has a gradient, and then there is a city drain, which kind of creates unusual circumstances, I think, for this particular lot. That's what I see as the exceptional characteristic for this particular lot. And that is what it is today when this applicant is before us. What can be done in the future in terms of working around the drain, we don't know all of that. But what we have in front of us right now, what I see is are exceptional characteristics of this particular lot.
Thank you, Mr. Kinkry. Mr. Green?
I'm coming back to the point that seems to have been made, but that I sort of started with. The patio, well, the patio is allowed, and the concrete is fine. The deck is the problem. Just a general search, every time I try to put in wooden patio, it says wooden patio furniture. It does not say wooden patio material. And so that seems to me to be a bit of a struggle. You could certainly surface it, right? Like you could make a faux boardwalk or something, but that's not what we're looking at. To me, this seems like a couple of things. I agree that I suspect that the decks from the neighbors, not the decks, the patios from the neighbors are contributing to the swamping in the petitioner's area, but the long-term environmental impact and even short-term, that to me is a planning commission thing. It's something where we may need to change the ordinance so that we're looking at something that is greener. Concrete is terribly environmentally unfriendly for all the reasons that have been mentioned by the petitioner, for groundwater, but also manufacturing and pouring and everything else. So maybe that's something that the city should look at for the code, but for the ordinance. But for what's in front of us, I don't love it, but he can build a patio. He's allowed to build a patio, and he's allowed to build a 7-foot deck.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Green. Any additional comments from the board? Mr. Eisenbacher?
I'd like to make a motion. Like to make a motion for approval, variance request at 5282 Ludstone be granted, that the variance be granted for the following reason: that the applicant has demonstrated A, the exceptional characteristic is the topography. B, it is not for some other location. C, it's not of a personal nature. D, it was not created by the current or previous owner. And E, it is not harmful or alter the essential character of the area, etc.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Eisenbacher that has been seconded by Mr. Desmond. Is there any further discussion before we proceed to a vote? I see no hands. So I think, Mr. Evans, we are prepared to vote on the motion to approve the variance request at 5282 Ludstone.
Mr. McCauley,
No.
Mr. Green,
No.
Mr. Rahman,
Yes.
Mr. Kenkre,
Yes.
Mr. Bossenbrook,
No.
Mr. Desmond,
Yes.
Mr. Eisenbacher.
Yes.
Motion passes 4-3.
Motion passes 4-3. Congratulations, sir. Your variance is approved. Thank you for coming out tonight and presenting your case. We appreciate your time. With that, we will move on to item number 6. And do we have any communications?
We do not.
No communications. Item number 7, any miscellaneous business before the board?
None.
None. And I will move to number 8. Any further public comment? No public comment. And that will be, we are on number 9. We will then adjourn for the evening. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you in October. Have a great evening.